The mansion was eerily silent. Its vast, opulent halls swallowed any trace of sound. A single gunshot shattered the stillness, echoing through the marble corridors. In the next instant, the world shifted. A body dropped to the ground, lifeless. The leader of one of the world's most powerful criminal syndicates, who had ruled with fear and ruthlessness, was no more. The camera lingered on the bloodied hand that reached for a phone, its trembling fingers typing a single message. "It's done. The king is dead." The weight of the words pressed down on the moment, leaving a lingering sense of dread. Was this an act of revenge, or was there something more? The underworld now faced an uncertain future, one where even the strongest could be brought down in an instant. But who had pulled the trigger, and why? The answers were buried beneath layers of intrigue and deception, waiting to be uncovered. Marco sat in the cold, dimly lit room of a rundown apartment, the flickering light from a single bulb casting long shadows against the walls. He couldn't escape the memories that haunted him: faces, screams, blood. Once he had been a trusted enforcer, a loyal soldier in the Mafia family. But that world had taken everything from him: his innocence, his family, his soul. Now, his only purpose was to destroy the empire he had once fought so hard to build. He had made a deal with law enforcement, but every step toward redemption felt like a betrayal. As the memories flooded back, Marco knew there would be no going back. The price of redemption was too high, but the cost of staying loyal was even worse. The knock on the door was light, almost hesitant, but Marco knew better than to underestimate the visitors in this world. Slowly, he stood up from the couch, his tired eyes reflecting the weight of years spent under the Mafia's oppressive rule. When he opened the door, standing in front of him was an unexpected face: Detective Evelyn Carter, an ally from his past, though she had always been more of a distant acquaintance than a friend. Her sharp eyes were filled with something between suspicion and understanding. "We need your help, Marco," she said, her voice firm but with an edge of uncertainty. "The syndicate's hold on this city is tighter than ever. And now, they've set their sights on someone we both care about." Marco clenched his fists, the memory of betrayal and lost loved ones surfacing once again. Evelyn wasn't here just for information. She needed him to make a choice. A choice between turning his back on the empire he helped build or plunging into a fight that could cost him everything. As Marco stepped outside the apartment, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. Evelyn's words echoed in his mind: "They've set their sights on someone we both care about." His past life with the Mafia had been one of violence and betrayal, but now it felt like he was being dragged back into the very web he had tried to escape. He watched the street lights flicker in the rain, his thoughts racing. He could feel the eyes of the city on him, even in the quiet solitude of the alley. The rain began to fall heavier, a perfect reflection of the storm brewing inside him. The last time he had taken a stand, it had cost him everything. But now, with Evelyn's plea hanging over him, Marco found himself at a crossroads. Could he walk away from the past, or would he once again get tangled in the Empire's dark embrace? The question burned in his mind as he wiped the rain from his face and stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The decision had been made. Marco didn't fully understand why he had agreed to help Evelyn, but as he walked alongside her through the rain-soaked streets, he felt something stirring inside him. Was it hope? Regret? Or perhaps the faintest trace of the man he used to be? A man who had once fought for a cause, even if that cause was a deadly corrupt one. As they made their way through the city, Marco couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and every corner he turned felt like another step deeper into the underworld he had tried to escape. They arrived at a nondescript building on the edge of town, where Evelyn had promised information on the syndicate's next move. But as they approached the door, Marco stopped, his instincts kicking in. He turned to Evelyn. "This is a trap, isn't it?" The silence that followed told him all he needed to know. There was no turning back now. They were walking into the heart of the storm. The dim glow of the office lights cast harsh shadows on the faces of Marco and Evelyn as they sat across from each other, the tension thick between them. "You know," Evelyn began, her voice cold but resolute, "the syndicate's plans are far more extensive than we thought. They're not just here in the city anymore. They've spread their influence across the globe." Marco's heart sank. It had been one thing to fight a small-time operation, but this was different. The stakes had grown beyond what he could have imagined. "We need to get to the top, find out who's pulling the strings," Evelyn continued, tapping a folder on the table. "But we can't do this alone. You're still inside, Marco. You've got the connections." Marco stared at the folder, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. The decision was clear. There was no turning back. The deeper he went, the more entangled he would become. But for the first time in years, Marco felt the pull of something greater than fear. It was a chance to dismantle the empire he had once helped build. Marco's mind raced as they exited the office, the cool night air hitting him like a wake-up call. His thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, eyes narrowing as he saw the name on the screen. It was a contact he had hoped to never hear from again. Carlo, an old associate from the Mafia. The message read, "You're being watched. Don't trust her." The words hit Marco like a punch to the gut. Carlo was the last person he should trust, but there was no denying that the Mafia had eyes everywhere. Marco looked at Evelyn, who was walking beside him, her expression unreadable. Was she hiding something? "We need to meet someone," Marco said, his voice low. Evelyn turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Who?" "Someone who can help us? Someone from my past." It was time for Marco to confront the ghosts he had left behind. The meeting was set in a hidden underground bar, a place where the underworld's secrets were traded with whispers and glances. Marco and Evelyn sat at a corner table waiting. The man they were about to meet was someone Marco had known from his days as an enforcer. Vincent, a former ally, now a shadow in the world he once thrived in. The door creaked open, and a man in his late 30s Italian descent entered. He was rugged, wearing a worn leather jacket and dark sunglasses, though it was night. Vincent sat across from them, his eyes scanning the room before focusing on Marco. "I never thought I'd see you here, Marco," he said, his voice gravelly. "You've gone soft, or you've got a death wish." Marco didn't flinch. "I need your help, Vincent. We need to take down the syndicate, and I'm going to need everything you know about them." Vincent chuckled darkly, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "That's a tall order, my friend, but I'll help you, for old time's sake." Marco's heart tightened. There was always a price to pay when dealing with Vincent. As the hours passed, the tension in the room continued to build. Marco listened intently as Vincent spoke, laying out the Mafia's reach, detailing connections to politicians, businessmen, and international crime families. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but Marco's mind kept drifting back to the warning he had received. "You're being watched." Was he being led into a trap? Every conversation with Vincent felt like a game of chess, every word calculated, every glance filled with hidden meaning. Evelyn's presence beside him was the only constant, yet something about her seemed off. As they left the bar, Vincent's final words echoed in Marco's mind. "You're not just fighting a syndicate, Marco. You're fighting a war that's bigger than you think." Marco didn't know if Vincent was trying to help or manipulate him, but he knew one thing for sure. They were now on a path that could lead to their destruction. The next morning, Marco and Evelyn stood in front of the imposing city skyscraper, the headquarters of one of the largest businesses in the country. It was a symbol of power, and beneath that shiny exterior lay the heart of the syndicate. Marco clenched his jaw. He had been inside these walls before, but never as a foe. "This is it," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "We go in, get the information, and get out. Fast." Marco looked at her, his heart racing. There was a deeper intensity in her eyes now, a sense of urgency that mirrored his own. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but he had no choice. The plan was set. As they walked toward the entrance, Marco knew one thing for sure. Betrayal was lurking around every corner, and every decision from here on out could be their last. Marco felt the tension in the air, the moment they entered the warehouse, its walls damp and cold. The dim light from the flickering overhead bulbs barely cut through the shadows, illuminating only the most essential details. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room, her hand resting lightly on the gun tucked into her belt. "This is where everything changes, Marco," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The syndicate's been making moves all over, and now is time to hit them where it hurts." Marco nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The warehouse, once a place where secrets had been exchanged, now felt like a tomb waiting to swallow them whole. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice strained. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "We hit their supply line, cut off their access to weapons. It'll send a message." Marco's fists clenched. This was it, the moment where everything they had worked for could either succeed or collapse under its own weight. And with every move, Marco knew he was inching closer to the betrayal that awaited him. The quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. Marco's heart skipped a beat as a familiar face stepped into view. Victor, an old associate, someone Marco had trusted in the past. He was no longer the man Marco remembered. His once pristine suit was now wrinkled, his eyes hollow with betrayal. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Marco said, his voice tight. "I thought you were dead." Victor's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I was, Marco. I was, but the syndicate doesn't let go so easily." Marco's mind raced as Victor stepped closer. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "You know I'm not with them anymore." Victor chuckled darkly. "You think you can just walk away from this life? No one walks away, Marco. Especially not you." The weight of his words hit Marco like a punch. There was no escape from this world. Not for him, not for anyone. The standoff was brief, but it felt like an eternity. Marco could feel the weight of Victor's words bearing down on him. "You should have stayed dead, Marco," Victor said with a sneer, his eyes glinting with malice. "Now you're going to see just how deep the syndicate's roots go. They don't care about you. They never did." Marco's jaw tightened. "I don't need your help, Victor. I'll bring them down on my own." Victor laughed bitterly. "That's the thing, Marco. You never were in control. You were just a pawn in their game, same as the rest of us." The truth in Victor's words stung like poison, but Marco couldn't let it show. "I'm not a pawn anymore," Marco replied, his voice steady. "I'm the one who's going to end this." With that, he turned to leave, but Victor's voice stopped him cold. "You're already too late." The words hung in the air, chilling Marco to the bone. Marco's pulse quickened as the truth began to sink in. He had been played, again. The plan he had set in motion, the alliances he had forged, it was all a game to the syndicate. Victor's words echoed in his mind as he walked away from the warehouse, Evelyn by his side. "I should have known," Marco muttered, his hands clenched into fists. "They're always watching." Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment, but Marco could feel the weight of her gaze. "I warned you, Marco. You can't trust anyone in this world." "I thought I could trust him," Marco said, his voice filled with frustration. "Now we've lost our chance to strike." Evelyn stopped walking, her hand on Marco's shoulder. "It's not over yet. We still have a chance. But you need to make a choice. Keep fighting for redemption, or let it consume you." Marco turned to her, his expression hardening. "I'm not walking away, Evelyn. Not this time." With that, they walked into the night, the uncertainty of their future hanging heavily between them. As the rain began to pour harder, Marco and Evelyn arrived at their destination, a small hidden office that served as their base of operations. Marco slammed the door shut behind them, his frustration evident in every movement. "Victor's playing us," he muttered, pacing the room. "I'm sure of it. He's always been a snake." Evelyn remained calm, standing near the table, her arms crossed. "We knew the risks, Marco. It's not over yet. You don't get it." Marco snapped, stopping in front of her. "I thought we had a plan. I thought we had a chance to take them down. But now everything's falling apart." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "You need to focus. We're still in this, but we can't do it alone. We need more intel. And we need to move quickly. The syndicate won't wait." Marco looked at her, his anger giving way to determination. "You're right, let's finish this." The city buzzed with the hum of constant activity, but inside Marco's cramped safe house, the atmosphere was suffocating. Marco paced back and forth, his mind racing with new revelations. "The syndicate is everywhere," he muttered to himself. "They have their claws in every corner of this city." Evelyn, standing at the table sorting through documents, looked up. "We're not the only ones with eyes on the streets, Marco," she said, her voice grave. "They've been watching us for weeks now, waiting for us to make a move." Marco stopped in his tracks, the reality of their situation hitting him full force. "And we just gave them the opening," he said through gritted teeth. "We've stirred the hornet's nest." The weight of their plan started to feel heavier with every passing minute. They were no longer just fighting a criminal empire. They were embroiled in a power struggle, where every step was shadowed by paranoia. Marco turned to Evelyn. "We need to act fast. We need to hit them where it hurts. And we need to do it before they make their move on us." The knock on the door was too soft to be an accident, yet Marco was too wary to simply open it. He motioned for Evelyn to stand back as he cautiously approached. When he opened it, he was face to face with an old ally, Dominic, a figure from his past, one who had once been a trusted member of the syndicate. Now Dominic was a ghost, a man who had seen the light and fled. "I know what you're doing, Marco," Dominic said, his voice low. "And I'm here to warn you. They're not just watching you. They're coming for you." Marco narrowed his eyes. "I already knew that. What do you want, Dominic?" Dominic stepped into the room, his eyes darting around nervously. "You're not just up against the syndicate anymore," he continued. "There's someone else, someone more dangerous than you realize. Someone who's pulling the strings behind all of this." Marco felt a chill run down his spine. "Who?" he asked, his voice hard. Dominic hesitated, then whispered, "The Don's daughter." The revelation hit Marco like a punch in the gut. The Don's daughter? He had known about the powerful Mafia families, but he had never anticipated being up against someone like her. "How is she involved?" Marco asked, trying to steady his voice. Dominic looked over his shoulder nervously before answering. "She's been running things from the shadows, pulling all the strings. The Don's empire is nothing without her. But she's been working from the inside, consolidating power, and making alliances that no one even knows about." Marco's mind raced. "So, what does this mean for us?" Dominic looked grim. "It means you're not just up against the syndicate anymore. You're up against a mastermind who will stop at nothing to keep her family's power intact. If she finds out you're a threat, you're dead." Marco's hands balled into fists. "I didn't sign up for this, but I'm not backing down either." Later that evening, as Marco and Evelyn walked through the streets, their faces shadowed by the looming weight of what they had just learned, Marco could feel the paranoia creeping in. Every passing car, every shadow in the alley, seemed to hide a threat. "She's coming for us, Evelyn," Marco said, his voice tight. "She's got eyes everywhere." Evelyn didn't respond immediately, her expression a mask of resolve. "We've been over this, Marco. We knew the risks. But if she's really as dangerous as Dominic says, then we need to be smarter than ever. We need to outsmart her, get ahead of her before she can move." Marco nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm not going to let her take everything from me." As they approached a nearby building, Marco stopped, turning to Evelyn. "We can't trust anyone now, not even the people we've worked with." Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "I trust you, Marco. That's all that matters now." With a deep breath, Marco looked up at the looming building ahead. The battle for the city had just become a battle for survival. The hours that followed were a blur of movement and adrenaline. Marco and Evelyn infiltrated an underground meeting spot, one that was believed to be a hub for the syndicate's operations. As they moved deeper into the building, Marco's mind raced. If they could cripple this operation, it would send a message to the Don's daughter and the entire syndicate. But as they neared the heart of the operation, Marco realized something was wrong. The place was too quiet, the lights too dim. "Something's off," Marco whispered. "We're walking into a trap." Evelyn nodded, her hand reaching for her weapon. "Get ready," she said, her voice calm but filled with the same tension Marco felt. The door ahead creaked open, and Marco stepped forward, his heart pounding. This was it. Either they would win, or they would be caught in a deadly game they could not escape. The silence in the car was deafening as Marco drove through the streets, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The night seemed endless, each passing second heavier than the last. The betrayal felt like a weight on his chest, suffocating him. "You were right," Marco finally said, breaking the quiet. "I should have trusted my instincts about Victor." Evelyn glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "We knew the risks. But we can't afford to dwell on it. Not now." Marco gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "I thought we were close to taking them down. Now, everything's falling apart. I don't know if we'll make it out of this alive, Evelyn." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the bitter taste of failure. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice firm. "We're not dead yet, Marco, but we need to keep moving. We don't have time to waste. The clock's ticking, and we're on borrowed time." Marco nodded, though a sense of dread settled in his gut. "I can't afford to lose anyone else," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Not after everything we've already sacrificed." They reached the meeting point, just as the sky began to darken. The building loomed before them, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was here that Marco had once made deals with men he now considered enemies, a place where blood had been spilled in the name of power. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Evelyn asked, her voice low. Marco nodded, his gaze fixed on the building. "This is where it all started, and this is where it ends." The door creaked as they entered, the smell of rust and old wood filling the air. Inside, the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, hiding the danger that waited in the corners. "We're not alone," Marco muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Evelyn stood beside him, ready for whatever came next. "Let's do this, Marco. We finish what we started." Inside the warehouse, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. Marco and Evelyn moved quietly, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. As they rounded a corner, they were met by a figure they hadn't expected to see. Victor, standing in the center of the room, his gun pointed directly at them. "I knew you wouldn't back off, Marco," Victor said with a grin, his voice cold. "But you're too late. The syndicate has already moved on to the next phase." Marco's eyes narrowed. "You think this ends with you, Victor?" he shot back, his voice filled with fury. "I'm not letting you get away with this." Victor's grin widened. "It's already too late for that. You've been a pawn in this game from the start, Marco. And now, it's checkmate." Marco's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. They had underestimated Victor, and now they were trapped. The standoff seemed to last forever, each second stretching into eternity as Marco and Victor exchanged words, the tension mounting. "You're making a mistake, Marco," Victor said, his tone mocking. "You can't defeat me. You don't have the resources, the power. You're outmatched." Marco's voice was steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "Maybe I don't have the power, Victor, but I've got something you don't." Victor raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Marco's eyes narrowed. "I've got something worth fighting for." With that, Marco lunged forward, the sound of gunfire ringing through the warehouse as the battle for their lives began. The air was thick with chaos, each moment a blur of movement and violence. The fight was brutal, and in the end Marco stood victorious, but not without cost. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, the pounding of his heart in his chest. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, Marco walked over to where Victor lay, his face twisted in pain. "You were right about one thing, Victor," Marco said, his voice cold. "This was checkmate. But not for me." Victor coughed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You think you've won, Marco. The syndicate doesn't fall because of one man. You're still just a pawn." Marco looked down at him, the last words Victor had spoken echoing in his mind. But in this moment, Marco knew he had taken back control. The Empire might not fall today, but this was just the beginning of the end. "It's over," Marco muttered. For you, and for the syndicate. With that he turned and walked away, leaving Victor's broken body behind. Marco stepped into the dimly lit mansion, the weight of everything he had fought for pressing down on him. He had been here before, but this time it was different. The air was thick with tension, the smell of blood and betrayal lingering in the corners. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes scanning the room. "We finish this tonight, Marco," she whispered, her voice resolute. Marco nodded, his heart pounding. This was the moment they had been working toward, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The final battle had begun. The door creaked open, and Marco stepped into the private study. He wasn't alone. The Don's daughter, Isabella, stood across from him, her eyes cold and calculating. "I've been waiting for you, Marco," she said, her voice like ice. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, but I'm afraid your time is up." Marco squared his shoulders, every inch the man who had fought through years of betrayal. "I didn't come for a fight, Isabella, but if it's war you want, I'm ready." Her lips curled into a smile. "You'll regret this." As Isabella's cold laughter echoed through the room, Marco's anger boiled over. "You've always been a puppet master, Isabella, but you've underestimated me," he said, stepping forward. Evelyn stood at his side, her hand resting on her gun, ready for anything. Isabella's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can take me down?" she asked, her voice a low growl. "I control everything. This empire is mine." Marco's eyes hardened. Not anymore. The final showdown had arrived, and there was no turning back. Gunshots rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space of the study. Marco ducked behind the desk, his heart racing. Evelyn was beside him, keeping her cool as she returned fire. "This ends now, Marco," Isabella shouted, her voice filled with fury. Marco's breathing was heavy as he peeked over the desk, his eyes locking onto her. "You think you can control everything? You're wrong." Marco took a deep breath, then leapt from behind cover, charging at Isabella with everything he had. This was the moment he would either win or die trying. The fight ended in silence. Isabella lay on the floor, her chest rising and falling slowly. Marco stood over her, his breathing heavy, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "It's over," Marco said, his voice cold. Isabella's eyes fluttered as she looked up at him. "You think you've won? The syndicate will never fall," she whispered. Marco looked down at her, his face hard. "Maybe, but not today." With that, he turned and walked out of the study, leaving her to her fate. The empire had crumbled, but at what cost? The final battle raged through the mansion, chaos unfolding in every corner. Marco and Evelyn fought side by side, their movements a synchronized dance of survival. "We're almost there," Marco shouted over the gunfire. Evelyn nodded, her face grim but determined. The mansion, once a symbol of the syndicate's power, was now a war zone. The walls shook as gunfire echoed through the halls, and Marco could feel the end approaching. Every step forward brought them closer to destroying the syndicate, but the cost was rising with every fight. As the last of the syndicate's enforcers fell, Marco and Evelyn stood in the heart of the mansion, surrounded by destruction. Marco's breathing was heavy, sweat dripping down his face. "It's done," he whispered, though the weight of victory felt hollow. Evelyn surveyed the room, her eyes scanning for threats. "Not yet," she said. "There's still one more thing we need to do." Marco nodded. The empire may have crumbled, but their work wasn't over. The final piece of the puzzle was still missing, and only one man had the answers. The final confrontation took place in a quiet, forgotten room in the mansion. Marco and Evelyn faced the mastermind behind the syndicate's operation, the man who had remained hidden until now. "You've done well, Marco," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "But you've failed to realize that you were never in control. This empire was never meant to fall." Marco's eyes hardened. "It's over," he said. "Your empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The man's smile faltered, his arrogance beginning to crack. "You don't understand," he whispered. "It's never over." The tension in the room was unbearable. Marco's gun was aimed at the mastermind, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. "This is it," Marco said, his voice barely a whisper. "I end this here." The mastermind smirked, his hands folded in front of him. "You think killing me will fix everything? You're just a soldier, Marco. You were never meant to lead." Marco's finger tightened on the trigger, the weight of the gun in his hand a constant reminder of the bloodshed that had brought him to this moment. With one final breath, he pulled the trigger. Marco walked away from the mansion, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily in his chest. The Empire had fallen, but the cost was great. He glanced at Evelyn, who walked beside him in silence. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice softer now. Marco didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure if it was over. The city would rebuild, but the scars left by the syndicate would remain. As they walked into the night, Marco knew one thing. He was free, but at a price he couldn't yet comprehend. In the distance, the faint sound of a phone ringing pierced the silence, signaling that the past was never truly gone.